The rain began just as Daniel Carter realized the truth. He stood outside the glass office building, the cold drops hitting the pavement like tiny drums. Inside, the lights still burned bright on the top floor. That was where his business partner, Victor Hale, was celebrating. Laughter echoed faintly through the lobby doors each time someone walked out. Daniel didn't move. Only a few hours earlier, he had believed Victor was his closest friend. They had built their company together from nothing. 5 years of long nights, missed holidays, and endless risk. Daniel had trusted Victor with everything: his ideas, his savings, even his future. Now that trust felt like shattered glass. Earlier that evening, Daniel had walked into the office with a quiet sense of pride. Their biggest contract had finally been approved. It was the moment they had worked toward for years. He expected to celebrate with Victor. Instead, he heard voices coming from the conference room. The door had been slightly open. Daniel had not meant to listen. But when he heard his own name, he stopped. Victor's voice was calm, almost amused. "Daniel will find out eventually," Victor said. Another man laughed, and when he does, Victor shrugged. "By then, it won't matter." The investors already signed the new agreement. "The company will be mine." Daniel froze. The other voice belonged to Mr. Langford, the main investor. Daniel recognized the tone immediately. But Daniel built most of the technology, Langford said. What happens when he objects? Victor's answer came without hesitation. "He can't object. The documents say he transferred his shares to me this afternoon." Daniel's mind went blank. He had signed papers earlier. Yes, but Victor had told him they were routine legal updates for the new contract. Daniel had trusted him enough not to read every line. Now the truth pressed down on him like heavy weight. Victor continued speaking. "Daniel is brilliant, but he's too trusting. Business isn't about friendship. It's about control." Langford chuckled softly. Cold, Victor, but effective. Daniel stepped away from the door before they could see him. His heart pounded so loudly he was sure the entire hallway could hear it. He walked out of the building slowly, like a man leaving a place that no longer belonged to him. And that was how he ended up standing in the rain. Inside the building, music started playing. Glasses clinked together in celebration. Victor was celebrating the theft of Daniel's life's work. Daniel stared at the glowing windows. His chest burned, but it wasn't just anger. It was disbelief. Victor had been more than a business partner. They met 8 years earlier at a small technology conference. Both were young, ambitious, and struggling to be taken seriously. Victor had charisma. He could walk into any room and convince people to believe in him. Daniel had the ideas, the systems, the designs, the long hours of coding and building. Together they had seemed unstoppable. Daniel remembered the first office they rented. It was barely larger than a storage room. The walls were cracked and the internet barely worked. But they were excited. Victor had once put a hand on Daniel's shoulder and said, "One day this little company will change everything." Daniel had believed him. He had believed every promise Victor made. The rain grew heavier. Daniel finally turned away from the building and began walking down the street. The city lights blurred in the wet pavement. He didn't know where he was going. His mind replayed the conversation over and over. Each word felt sharper every time he remembered it. Too trusting. The phrase echoed in his head. Daniel had always believed honesty mattered. He believed people succeeded together, not by destroying each other. But Victor had never believed that. And now Daniel had nothing. His savings were gone, invested into the company. His ownership had been signed away without his knowledge. Victor had planned it carefully. Daniel understood that now. The sudden legal documents, the rushed signatures. Friendly smile Victor gave him that afternoon. It had all been part of the trap. Daniel reached a small park near the office district and sat down on a wet bench. The cold soaked through his jacket, but he didn't care. He stared at the empty playground across the street. For the first time in years, Daniel felt completely lost. He had spent so long building the future that he had forgotten how fragile it was. A car passed slowly through the street, headlights cutting through the rain. For a moment, the bright light reflected in Daniel's eyes. Then the car disappeared. Daniel took a deep breath. Anger began to replace shock. Victor had not just stolen a company, he had stolen years of trust. Memories flooded Daniel's mind. Late nights when Victor promised they were brothers. Meetings where Victor praised Daniel's brilliance in front of investors. Celebrations after small victories. All of it, suddenly, felt fake. Daniel clenched his fists. For the first time in his life, he felt something dark growing inside him. The thought came quietly. Victor needs to pay for this. Daniel immediately pushed the thought away. He wasn't that kind of person. Revenge was for people who couldn't move forward. At least that was what he used to believe. But the rain kept falling, and the image of Victor laughing upstairs refused to leave Daniel's mind. Victor was celebrating while Daniel sat alone in the cold. Daniel stood up suddenly. He walked through the park until he reached the far sidewalk. The rain had slowed now, leaving the air thick and quiet. Across the street stood a small cafe that stayed open late. Daniel stepped inside. The warm air hit him immediately. A few customers sat quietly at tables, working on laptops or drinking coffee. Daniel ordered a black coffee and sat near the window. From there, he could still see the distant office tower where Victor was celebrating. The building looked smaller. Now, Daniel took a sip of coffee and closed his eyes. He forced himself to think clearly. Anger alone would not help him. Victor had planned everything carefully. That meant Victor believed Daniel was finished. That belief might be Victor's biggest mistake. Daniel opened his eyes again. For the first time that night, his thoughts began moving with purpose. Victor had control of the company, yes. But companies were more than paperwork. They were made of people, employees, clients, reputation. Daniel knew the technology better than anyone. He understood the system they built from the ground up. Victor had taken ownership, but Victor did not understand the heart of the product the way Daniel did. That realization planted a small seed of determination. Daniel stared at the office tower again. The lights were still bright. Victor was probably giving speeches now, telling investors how the company would grow under his leadership. Daniel almost laughed. Victor believed the story was over, but for Daniel, it had just begun. The coffee slowly warmed his hands. Daniel thought about the employees who trusted him, the engineers who worked late nights beside him. Many of them respected Daniel more than Victor. Would they stay loyal if they knew the truth? Another idea formed. Victor had used deception to take everything. But deception could also reveal weakness. Daniel wasn't interested in destroying Victor out of anger. At least that was what he told himself. What he wanted was justice. Victor believed Daniel was naive. Victor believed Daniel would simply walk away. Daniel watched the rain fade into mist outside the cafe window. His mind felt sharper now. The betrayal had cut deep, but it had also awakened something stronger. Determination. Victor had taken Daniel's company, but Victor had also revealed his true nature. And Daniel understood something important. A man who wins through betrayal must keep betraying others to stay on top. Eventually, those betrayals create enemies. Daniel finished his coffee slowly. The city had grown quieter. Most offices had turned off their lights. Only the top floor of Victor's building still glowed. Daniel imagined Victor standing in front of investors, smiling confidently. Victor believed he had already won. Daniel stood up and walked to the cafe door. Before leaving, he looked at the tower one last time. His expression had changed. The shock was gone. In its place was calm focus. Victor had taken something precious. Now Daniel faced a choice. He could walk away, rebuild somewhere else, and forget the betrayal, or he could return and make Victor face the consequences. The second path was dangerous. It meant stepping into a game Daniel had never played before. A game of strategy, patience, and quiet revenge. Daniel stepped back into the cool night air. The rain had finally stopped. The city lights reflected in the wet streets like scattered stars. Daniel took a slow breath. For years, he had built something with trust. Victor had destroyed that trust in a single day. But Victor had also created something else. A reason for Daniel to fight back. Daniel began walking away from the cafe, disappearing into the quiet streets. Inside the tower, the celebration continued. Victor raised another glass, smiling as investors congratulated him. He never once looked down at the dark streets below. If he had, he might have noticed the man walking away in silence, a man who had lost everything, and who had just begun planning how to take it all back. Daniel did not return home that night. Instead, he walked through the quiet streets until the sky slowly turned gray with the first light of morning. The city was waking up, but Daniel felt as if he had already lived through an entire lifetime. In a single night, the betrayal no longer shocked him. The pain was still there, but it had sharpened into something colder and more focused. He knew one thing clearly. Now Victor believed Daniel was finished. That belief would become Daniel's greatest advantage. Later that morning, Daniel sat in a small library across town. It was a place he used to visit years ago when he first started designing the technology that built their company. The quiet room smelled of books and coffee. People moved softly between the shelves, unaware that Daniel's mind was racing with plans. He opened his laptop and began studying the company records. He still had access to. Victor had taken control of the shares, but Daniel had helped design many of the internal systems. He understood how everything worked behind the scenes. Every update, every client interaction, every line of development had passed through his hands at some point. Daniel wasn't looking for a quick way to strike back. He knew revenge built on anger often collapsed too soon. Instead, he studied carefully. Learning how Victor had changed the company after the takeover, the changes came quickly. Victor started presenting himself as the sole visionary behind the company. Interviews appeared online where Victor spoke confidently about the future. He described the technology as his personal creation, mentioning Daniel only briefly as someone who had contributed in the early stages. Daniel watched one interview in silence. Victor sat in a polished studio chair, smiling at the camera. He spoke smoothly, telling the story of how he had led the company to success. To anyone watching, it sounded convincing, but Daniel noticed the small mistakes. Victor struggled when the interviewer asked technical questions. His answers sounded vague. He used big words but avoided details. Daniel closed the video slowly. Victor could take credit for the company, but he couldn't replace the mind that built it. That thought gave Daniel patience. Over the next few days, Daniel reached out to people he trusted. Not many at first. Only a few engineers who had worked closely with him from the beginning. He didn't tell them everything. He simply asked how things were going at the company. The answers came carefully at first, but the pattern was clear. Victor was pushing the team hard. Deadlines were tighter. Meetings were longer. The friendly atmosphere the company once had was slowly disappearing. One engineer named Marcus finally spoke honestly during a late phone call. "Something feels wrong," Marcus said quietly. "Victor keeps changing the direction of the product. He acts like he understands it, but half the time the instructions don't make sense." Daniel listened without interrupting. Marcus continued. "People are confused, but no one wants to question him." Daniel asked one simple question. "Do they trust him?" Marcus hesitated before answering. "Not the way they trusted you." Those words stayed in Daniel's mind long after the call ended. Trust had built the company. Victor taken control through deception. That meant the foundation of his power was weak. Daniel didn't rush. Instead, he began rebuilding his connections. Quietly. Old colleagues, former clients, and investors who respected his work. He met them one by one, never speaking with anger. He simply told them the truth about what had happened. Some were surprised. Others looked disappointed, but not shocked. Victor had always been charming, but charm often hid ambition. As the weeks passed, Daniel noticed something interesting. People were willing to listen to him. They remembered the long nights he spent solving problems. They remembered who actually built the technology. Victor had the title now. But Daniel still had something powerful: credibility. Still, Daniel's mind struggled with a deeper question. What exactly did revenge mean? Late one evening, Daniel sat alone in his apartment, staring at the city lights outside the window. He imagined confronting Victor directly, exposing the truth. Watching his former partner lose everything the way Daniel had, the image brought a brief sense of satisfaction, but it also felt empty. Daniel realized revenge was not just about destroying someone else. It was about deciding what kind of person he wanted to become after the betrayal. Victor believed success meant control at any cost. Daniel had once believed success meant building something meaningful. The two ideas could not exist together. The conflict inside him grew stronger each day. Part of him wanted to crush Victor's reputation and reclaim what had been stolen. Another part wondered if there was a better path, but one thing remained. Certain Victor's empire was already beginning to shake. New reports showed clients complaining about delays, employees quietly searching for other jobs, investors asking harder questions during meetings. Victor was trying to lead a machine he didn't fully understand. Daniel watched from a distance, patient and silent. He wasn't ready to act yet, but the moment was getting closer. And when that moment came, Daniel would have to decide: would he take revenge and destroy the man who betrayed him? Or would he choose a different ending to the story Victor had begun? The invitation arrived on a quiet Monday morning. Daniel stared at the email for a long time before opening it again, making sure he had read it correctly. The company was hosting a major investor conference. Victor would present the future of the business, announce new expansions, and secure another round of funding. The event would decide whether Victor's control became permanent. Daniel understood immediately why the invitation mattered. One of the investors he had spoken with weeks earlier had arranged it quietly. Daniel was being given a chance not as an employee, not as an owner, but as a guest with permission to speak if necessary. It was the moment everything had been building toward. For days, Daniel prepared carefully. He reviewed documents, emails, development records, and timelines that proved who had created the company's core technology. Every detail was organized clearly. He wasn't planning chaos. He wanted truth to speak for itself. Still, the closer the event came, the heavier his thoughts became. At night, Daniel questioned his motives. Was he doing this to restore fairness or simply to hurt Victor? The difference mattered more than he expected. Revenge had once felt simple when the pain was fresh. Now it felt complicated, almost dangerous. He remembered the night in the rain when anger had taken control of his thoughts. Back then, he wanted Victor to suffer the same loss he had felt. But weeks of reflection had changed him. He realized revenge could easily turn him into someone he no longer recognized. The morning of the conference arrived, cold and clear. Daniel walked into the hotel ballroom wearing a simple dark suit. The room buzzed with conversation. Investors, executives, and reporters filled the space. Large screens displayed the company logo, the logo Daniel had designed. Years earlier at his kitchen table. Seeing it again stirred something deep inside him. Victor stood near the stage, laughing confidently as he greeted guests. He looked relaxed, successful, completely certain of his victory. When Victor noticed Daniel across the room, his smile faltered for only a second before returning. Victor walked over calmly. "I didn't expect to see you here," said, his voice polite but cautious. Daniel met his gaze. I received an invitation. Victor nodded slowly. Well, I hope you're doing well. The words sounded friendly, but Daniel heard the warning beneath them. Victor believed he still controlled the situation. Daniel simply replied, Will, see? The presentation began soon after. Victor stepped onto the stage to applause. He spoke smoothly, describing growth, innovation, and bold plans for the future. The audience listened closely, but as the presentation continued, problems appeared. Victor struggled when explaining technical details. Slides showed ambitious promises, yet lacked clear explanations. Investors exchanged uncertain glances. Daniel felt the tension building. Finally, the moderator opened the floor for questions. One investor stood. Can you explain how the new system improves processing efficiency? The numbers seem unclear. Victor hesitated. He gave a long answer filled with general statements, but it avoided specifics. Another investor asked a deeper question about the technology's foundation. Victor's confidence began to crack. The moderator then noticed Daniel's raised hand. Yes, she said. You may speak. The room grew quiet as Daniel stood. Victor's expression tightened. Daniel spoke calmly, his voice steady. He did not accuse or insult. Instead, he explained the technology clearly, how it was designed, why certain systems worked, and what challenges still existed. His knowledge was precise and undeniable. Murmurs spread across the room. Investors leaned forward, listening carefully. Daniel then revealed the timeline of development, showing documents that proved his role as the primary creator. He spoke respectfully, never raising his voice. He did not attack Victor personally. He simply presented facts. The truth carried its own weight. Victor attempted to interrupt, but the moderator asked him to wait. When Daniel finished, silence filled the ballroom. The investors began asking Daniel questions instead of Victor. Their tone shifted from curiosity to concern. They realized the company's success depended on someone who was no longer part of leadership. Victor's control began slipping away, not through humiliation, but through clarity. Daniel looked at Victor. For a brief moment, he saw something unexpected in Victor's eyes. Not anger, fear. Victor finally spoke. You're trying to destroy everything we built. Daniel paused before answering. No, he said quietly. I'm trying to protect what we built. The difference changed the atmosphere entirely. The conference ended with investors requesting a private review of company leadership. Decisions would follow soon. Victor walked off the stage without looking back. Daniel stepped outside into the afternoon sunlight. The air felt lighter than it had in weeks. He realized something important then. He had reached the moment of revenge. Chance to completely ruin Victor's reputation. He could have exposed every detail harshly, turned the room against him with anger and accusations. But he hadn't. Instead, he chose truth over destruction. Days later, the investors restructured the company. Victor lost his position as sole leader. Legal reviews began regarding the share transfer. Daniel was offered a chance to return in a leadership role. He accepted, but with one condition. The company would move forward with transparency and shared control. Never again built on blind trust alone. Victor left quietly. There was no dramatic downfall, only consequences shaped by his own choices. One evening, Daniel stood alone in the office again, looking out over the city lights. The same building that once felt stolen now felt different. He expected victory to feel satisfying. But what he felt instead was calm. Revenge had not healed him. Truth had. Daniel understood now that revenge driven by anger only spreads pain. But justice guided by integrity creates change. Victor had taken everything through betrayal. Daniel had taken it back without becoming the same kind of man. And as the city moved below him, Daniel realized the real victory was not reclaiming the company. It was keeping his character intact while doing it.